There's something you've been carrying that you can't seem to put down. Maybe it's a person who won't change no matter how much you try. Maybe it's a problem that keeps showing up in different forms. Maybe it's a situation you've replayed in your mind 1,000 times, searching for what you could have done differently. And underneath it all is this exhausting belief: if I could just figure this out, if I could just make them understand, if I could just control how this unfolds, then I'd finally have peace. But here's what the Buddha discovered 25 centuries ago, sitting beneath a tree, watching his own mind create suffering. Peace doesn't come from finally getting what you want. It comes from understanding why you're suffering in the first place. And what he saw was this: you're not suffering because of the difficult person, the unsolved problem, or the situation that went wrong. You're suffering because you're clinging to how you think it should be, instead of accepting what actually is. Every time you try to force someone to be different, you create suffering. Every time you resist a problem instead of working with it, you create suffering. Every time you demand that a situation unfold your way, you create suffering. But the Buddha also discovered something else. You can let go without giving up. You can accept reality without becoming passive. You can release the grip without losing what matters. Tonight, you'll learn 10 teachings that show you exactly how practical wisdom for the moments when your mind won't stop spinning, when your heart won't stop hurting, when you're exhausted from trying to control what refuses to be controlled. Find a comfortable position. If it feels right, share where you're listening from. Let's begin. Watch what happens in your mind right now. Notice how it reaches for something: a memory, a worry, a hope, a person. This reaching, this grasping movement of consciousness is where almost all your suffering begins. The Buddha spent years observing this pattern in his own awareness. He watched how the mind constantly moves toward what it wants and away from what it doesn't want. And he saw something most people never notice. The suffering doesn't come from wanting itself. It comes from the desperate grip that follows. He called this tanha, not desire, not preference, not love, but clinging. The white-knuckled grip on things that are already slipping away. You cling to people, hoping they'll remain exactly as they are today. You hold an image of who they were 6 months ago, a year ago, and you expect that version to still exist. But people are rivers, not statues. They move, shift, change current. When you try to freeze them in place, you're not holding them. You're holding a memory that no longer matches reality. You cling to situations, believing they'll provide the stability you crave. This job will finally bring security. This relationship will finally bring completion. This achievement will finally bring worth. And when these situations inevitably shift, because all situations do, you feel betrayed by life itself. You even cling to your disappointments. You replay the moment things went wrong. You hold on to the hurt as if releasing it would mean the experience didn't matter. as if your suffering proves your love, as if the pain is all you have left of what you lost. This clinging creates an inner war. Reality keeps moving forward, but your mind keeps pulling backward, trying to hold what's already gone. And in that tension between what is and what you wish still was, that's where you break. There was once a young monk who received a gift from a wealthy patron, an alms bowl of extraordinary beauty. It was perfectly crafted, smooth as silk, with a glaze that caught light like water. The monk had never owned anything so fine. He began to cherish it. Each morning, he would polish it until it gleamed. Each evening, he would check it for cracks or chips. He worried when other monks handled it. He kept it separate from the common bowls. His mind, which had been training toward freedom, became occupied with a single object. One afternoon, another monk was washing the bowls after the meal. He picked up the beautiful bowl, admired its craftsmanship, and then, his hands slippery with soap, it slipped. The bowl fell to the stone floor and shattered into dozens of pieces. The young monk heard the crash from across the monastery. He ran to find his beloved bowl destroyed. His face collapsed. Tears came before he could stop them. The other monks stood silent, watching his grief pour out over broken clay. His teacher, an old monk who rarely spoke, came and stood beside the scattered pieces. He looked at his student's face, then at the shards, then back at the young monk. "Tell me," the teacher said quietly, "what broke here today?" The young monk gestured at the floor. "My bowl, the most beautiful thing I've ever owned." The teacher shook his head. The bowl did what all bowls eventually do. Clay returns to clay. What actually broke today was not the bowl. It was your belief that the bowl would last forever. He knelt down and picked up a piece of the shattered glaze. All conditioned things have the nature to break, to fade, to end. This bowl was born with its death already inside it. From the moment the potter shaped the clay, decay began. You knew this intellectually, but you chose to ignore it. You treated the impermanent as if it were permanent. That is where your suffering came from, not from the breaking, but from the pretending. The young monk looked at the pieces scattered across the floor. Something shifted in his understanding. "But teacher," he said, "if everything breaks, fades, ends, how do we love anything? How do we care without clinging?" The old monk smiled. "You love it precisely because it will end. You appreciate its presence today because tomorrow is not guaranteed. This is not coldness. This is seeing clearly." The Buddha taught this understanding with 3 simple words in the ancient language: Sabbe Sankara Anicca. All conditioned things are impermanent. Everything that has come together will eventually come apart. Everything born carries death within it. Everything that begins is already moving toward its end. This isn't pessimism. It's physics. It's biology. It's the nature of reality itself. The person you love is changing with every breath. Cells die and regenerate. Thoughts arise and dissolve. The personality you fell in love with is not the same personality that exists today, even if the name remains the same. They are a process, not a fixed point. And so are you. Relationships shift because the people within them are always shifting. What felt true between you last year may not feel true today, not because someone failed, but because growth happened. And growth, by definition, means change. Circumstances move because they arise from countless conditions, most of which you cannot see or control. Your job security depends on an economy you didn't create. Your health depends on a body you didn't design. Your relationships depend on another person's inner world, which you will never fully access. Even your own heart transforms. What mattered intensely 5 years ago may barely register today. What you once believed with certainty might now seem naive. Who you were at 20 is a stranger to who you are at 40. This is not failure. This is being alive. But the mind doesn't want this truth. The mind wants permanence, stability, something solid to stand on. So it creates an illusion. It pretends things won't change. It treats the temporary as eternal. And then, when change inevitably arrives, the mind feels shocked, betrayed, devastated, as if life broke a promise it never made. This is the source of so much unnecessary suffering. Not the change itself, but the expectation that change wouldn't happen. People often ask, if everything is impermanent, does that mean nothing matters? If everything ends, why care about anything? The Buddha's answer was the opposite of what you'd expect. Things matter precisely because they're impermanent. The temporary nature of life is what gives each moment its weight, its preciousness, its urgency to be fully present. If you had infinite time with someone, you could always talk to them tomorrow. But when you understand that tomorrow is not guaranteed, this conversation right now becomes irreplaceable. If your body would last forever, you could postpone that walk in the morning light. But when you recognize that your ability to walk is temporary, each step becomes a gift. Impermanence doesn't diminish value, it creates it. The Buddha also taught about how things come into being and pass away, a teaching called dependent origination. It's simple but profound. Everything arises when conditions are right, and everything ceases when conditions change. Nothing exists independently. Everything is the result of countless causes coming together. A flower blooms when soil, water, sunlight, and seed align. When any of these conditions change, the flower fades. This isn't the universe punishing the flower. It's just the natural movement of conditions. A relationship begins when two people's paths cross at the right time, in the right circumstances, with compatible needs and available hearts. When those conditions shift, when needs change, when circumstances evolve, When growth moves people in different directions, the relationship may naturally complete itself. This doesn't mean no one tried hard enough or loved deeply enough. It means conditions changed, and clinging to arrangements that no longer serve anyone creates suffering for everyone involved. When you chase what's naturally moving away, you're fighting against the movement of conditions themselves. It's like trying to hold the outgoing tide in your hands. You can grip as tightly as you want, but the ocean doesn't care about your desperation. It moves according to forces far larger than your will. This is where people misunderstand Buddhist teaching. They think acceptance means giving up, becoming passive, letting life happen to you without responding. But the Buddha taught something more nuanced. You can work with conditions without clinging to outcomes. You can plant seeds without demanding that every seed must grow. You can love someone without insisting they remain exactly as they are today. You can hope for something without collapsing when it doesn't arrive. Letting go is not coldness, it's clarity. When you release your grip on how things should be, you can finally see how things actually are. And from that clear seeing, wise action becomes possible. You stop wasting energy trying to revive what's already ended. You stop forcing conversations with people who've already decided to leave. You stop replaying situations that cannot be changed, searching for a different outcome that doesn't exist. This isn't giving up. It's emotional maturity. It's understanding that your peace matters more than your need to control reality. When you release what's genuinely outside your control, other people's choices, the timing of events, how circumstances unfold, something remarkable happens. Space opens in your chest. Your breath deepens. The constant mental argument with reality finally quiets. You reclaim the energy you'd been pouring into a battle you could never win, and that energy returns to you as peace. The Buddha once said something that sounds simple, but contains everything. Whatever is subject to origination is subject to cessation. Whatever begins, ends. Whatever arises, passes. Whatever comes together, eventually comes apart. This is not a tragedy. This is not a flaw in the design of existence. This is just what is. Your suffering comes from arguing with this truth, from demanding that reality operate differently, from clinging to the fantasy of permanence in a universe where nothing stands still. Peace was available to you all along, not by getting what you wanted, not by making people stay, not by controlling outcomes. It was available the moment you stopped fighting against the nature of things. And here's what the Buddha saw that most people miss. The deepest form of clinging isn't to things or people or situations. It's far more subtle than that. It's the clinging to being seen a certain way, to being validated, to having your worth confirmed by forces outside yourself. That's where we're going next. There's a form of clinging that's harder to see than your attachment to people or outcomes. It hides behind good behavior, behind kindness, behind the desire to be helpful. And because it wears the mask of virtue, you rarely question it. It's the need to be approved of, validated, seen as good. Watch what happens inside you when someone criticizes you. Notice the immediate tightening, the rush to defend, the way your mind scrambles to restore the image that was just challenged. That reaction, that sudden panic at being seen differently than you want to be seen, reveals how much of your peace depends on other people's perceptions. The Buddha identified 8 forces that constantly blow through human life, moving people back and forth like grass in the wind. He called them the 8 worldly winds: praise and blame, fame and disrepute, gain and loss, pleasure and pain. These forces are always present, always shifting. One day you're praised, the next day you're blamed. One day you gain something valuable, the next day you lose it. The winds never stop blowing. Most people spend their entire lives being moved by these winds. When praised, they feel elated, worthy, secure. When blamed, they feel crushed, defensive, diminished. Their inner state becomes completely dependent on which wind is blowing at any given moment. This is exhausting, and it's a particular kind of suffering that you create yourself, not because you're weak, but because you've made your peace conditional on forces you cannot control. When you need validation, you hand other people the power to determine your emotional state. Their words can lift you or destroy you. Their silence creates anxiety. Their attention feels like oxygen. Their approval becomes the measure of your worth. And without realizing it, you begin performing. You adjust your behavior, your words, sometimes even your beliefs, to avoid the pain of disapproval. You lose access to your own truth because someone else's perception feels more important than what you actually think or feel. There's a story about the Buddha that demonstrates this teaching perfectly. One afternoon, as the Buddha sat teaching a small group under a tree, a Brahmin priest approached. This man was furious. He had heard that one of his relatives had joined the Buddha's community, leaving behind the prestigious Brahmin caste to become a wandering monk. To this priest, it was an unforgivable betrayal. He walked directly up to the Buddha and began hurling insults. He called him a fraud, a destroyer of families, a fool, leading other fools. His voice grew louder with each accusation. He used the harshest language he could summon, designed to provoke, to wound, to humiliate. The Buddha sat completely still. His face remained calm. He didn't interrupt, didn't defend himself, didn't show any reaction at all. He simply listened as the man exhausted his anger into the air between them. The other monks shifted uncomfortably. Some looked away. Others watched their teacher, confused by his silence. Finally, the Brahmin ran out of words. He stood there, breathing hard, waiting for a response, for anger, for something that would justify his aggression. The Buddha looked at him with gentle eyes and asked a simple question. Tell me, if someone offers you a gift and you choose not to accept it, to whom does the gift belong? The Brahmin, caught off guard by the question, answered automatically. It would still belong to the person who tried to give it. The Buddha nodded. Just so. You have offered me anger, insults, harsh words, but I do not accept them. They remain yours. You may keep them. The Brahmin stood frozen. Something in his understanding shifted. He had come to wound the Buddha, to make him feel the pain of disapproval, to shake his composure. But the Buddha's peace was not dependent on being approved of. It wasn't even dependent on being treated with respect. It existed independent of external conditions. That's what freedom from the 8 worldly winds looks like. When praise comes, you receive it without inflating. When blame comes, you consider whether it's true without collapsing. Neither moves you from your center. This doesn't mean you don't care what people think. It means you don't need them to think well of you in order to maintain your peace. There's a profound difference. When you're free from needing approval, criticism becomes information rather than devastation. You can hear feedback without interpreting it as an attack on your fundamental worth. You can consider whether there's truth in what someone says without your entire sense of self collapsing around their words. When you're free from needing approval, praise becomes pleasant, but not necessary. You can enjoy recognition without depending on it, without chasing it, without structuring your entire life around obtaining it. But when your happiness depends on approval, you create an inherently unstable life, because people are inconsistent. Their moods change, their opinions shift, their loyalty wavers, their attention moves elsewhere. They praise you today and forget you tomorrow. They criticize you in one moment and appreciate you in the next. The Buddha understood this instability deeply. He watched how people are swayed by countless factors: their own pain, their conditioning, their current circumstances, their unmet needs. Their perception of you has more to do with what's happening inside them than with who you actually are. So when you tie your inner stability to their approval, you're building your house on sand that shifts with every tide. You live in constant turbulence, rising and falling with each change in the wind. This need for validation hides in the most innocent places. It hides in your desire to be helpful. Am I doing enough? It hides in your kindness. Do they see how much I care? It hides in your work. Do they appreciate my effort? It hides in your relationships. Do they value me the way I value them? There's nothing inherently wrong with wanting to be appreciated, respected, valued. These are natural human desires. The problem arises when your peace becomes conditional on receiving these things. Then you begin to contort yourself. You say yes when you mean no because you fear disapproval. You hide parts of yourself that might not be well received. You perform a version of yourself that you think others will accept, and in the process, you lose touch with who you actually are. You become so focused on managing other people's perceptions that you forget to check in with your own truth. You stop asking, is this what I actually think? Is this what I genuinely want? Does this align with my values? Instead, you only ask, will this make them approve of me? This is how you abandon yourself while believing you're maintaining connection. The Buddha taught a form of mental stability called equanimity. The word in the ancient language is upekkha, a balanced, spacious awareness that remains steady regardless of what's happening around you. Equanimity doesn't mean you don't feel anything. It means you feel without being controlled by the feeling. You notice praise without needing more of it. You notice blame without being destroyed by it. Think of a mountain. Weather moves across its surface. Storms, sunshine, wind, snow. The mountain doesn't resist the weather or chase after it. It remains stable beneath all conditions. This is what your mind can become when it's no longer blown by the 8 worldly winds. Not rigid, not cold, not indifferent, but stable, responsive, without being reactive, present without being dependent. Monks and nuns train in this quality for years. They practice receiving both praise and criticism with the same balanced awareness. When someone honors them, they bow and continue their practice. When someone insults them, they bow and continue their practice. Neither moves them from their center because their center is not built on external validation. It's built on something deeper, on their commitment to truth, on their practice of awareness, on their understanding of what actually creates peace. You can develop this same stability, not by becoming a monk, but by noticing when you're being moved by the winds. Notice when praise makes you feel inflated, suddenly more worthy, suddenly more confident. Notice when criticism makes you feel deflated, less worthy, less sure of yourself. Both movements reveal the same thing. Your sense of worth is being determined by forces outside you. The practice is simple, but not easy. When praised, receive it graciously, but don't grasp it. Don't replay it in your mind, searching for more evidence of your worth. Just let it be what it is, someone's opinion in this moment. When criticized, consider whether there's truth in it, without interpreting it as a verdict on your entire existence. If it's accurate, learn from it. If it's not, let it pass, like clouds moving across the sky. The Buddha once said something that sounds almost impossible until you experience it yourself. He said that a wise person is like a solid rock, not shaken by storms, not moved by winds, completely stable, regardless of external conditions. This doesn't mean becoming hard or closed. Rock, in this metaphor, represents something that has found its own ground, its own foundation, that doesn't need anything external to remain stable. When you're no longer moved by praise or blame, something remarkable happens in your relationships. You stop performing. You stop adjusting yourself to maintain approval. You stop hiding the parts of yourself that might be rejected. You become honest, not harsh, not careless, but truthful. You say what you actually think because you're no longer terrified of disapproval. You make decisions based on what feels right to you, not what looks acceptable to others. And here's what's surprising. This honesty often strengthens relationships rather than damaging them, because people can sense when you're being real versus when you're performing. And real connection only happens between people who are willing to be seen as they actually are. The people who genuinely care about you will respect your truth, even when it's different from what they expected. The people who only valued you for your compliance, your agreeableness, your willingness to be what they needed, those relationships will naturally shift or end. And that shift, though sometimes painful, is actually a form of freedom. You're no longer carrying relationships built on pretense. You're no longer exhausting yourself trying to maintain an image that was never truly you. Your emotional life becomes simpler. You're no longer riding the roller coaster of other people's changing opinions. You're no longer devastated by criticism or inflated by praise. You exist on steadier ground. This is what the Buddha meant by freedom from suffering. Not that nothing difficult ever happens, but that your peace is no longer held hostage by external conditions. The winds keep blowing, they always will, but you're no longer grass bending with every breeze. You've found your own rootedness. Freedom from approval opens a door. Walking through it takes practice. What the Buddha taught next goes deeper. It's about how you relate to your own mind, your own emotions, your own suffering. Most people believe letting go happens the way healing happens after an injury. You simply wait, and time does the work. You wake up one morning and the pain is gone. The grip has loosened. The person or situation no longer occupies every thought. But that's not how it works. Time alone doesn't heal anything. Time just passes. What heals is what you do with the time. The choices you make again and again, moment by moment, when your mind tries to return to what you're attempting to release. Letting go is not passive. It's one of the most active things you'll ever do. It's a discipline, a cultivation, a practice you engage with daily, sometimes moment by moment, when the pull is strong. You don't simply decide once to let go, and then it's done. You decide again when you wake up, and the first thought is of them. You decide again when something reminds you of what you lost. You decide again when your mind offers to replay the entire story one more time. Each time you choose release over rumination, you strengthen something inside you. Each time you gently redirect your attention away from the closed door and toward what's actually in front of you, you're training your mind in a new pattern. The Buddha understood this deeply. He knew that insight alone isn't enough. You can understand intellectually that clinging creates suffering and still find yourself clinging. Understanding points the direction, but practice is what carries you there. He taught this through a parable that's simple on the surface, but contains layers of wisdom. One day, the Buddha was teaching a group of monks about the purpose of his teachings. Some of them had become attached to the teachings themselves, memorizing them, debating their precise meanings, holding on to them as if the words themselves were liberation. The Buddha said, "Suppose a man needs to cross a large river. The near shore is dangerous and frightening. The far shore is safe and peaceful. But there is no bridge, no ferry, no easy way across. So the man gathers reeds and branches and vines. He binds them together into a raft. He climbs onto this raft and, using his hands and feet, paddles to the other shore. He crosses successfully. He reaches safety." Now, the Buddha asked, what should this man do with the raft? Should he think to himself, "This raft has been very useful to me. It carried me to safety. I should honor it by carrying it on my back wherever I go from now on"? The monks smiled. The answer was obvious. "No," they said. "He should leave the raft on the shore. It served its purpose. Carrying it further would be a burden." The Buddha nodded. "Just so. Even these teachings are like a raft, to be used for crossing over, not to be held onto. When you've crossed to the far shore, you leave even the Dharma behind. How much more should you leave behind what never served you in the first place?" This parable cuts through a fundamental misunderstanding. If even the Buddha's teachings, which lead to liberation, which end suffering, which point toward truth, are meant to be released once they've served their purpose, then holding on to what actively harms you makes no sense at all. The relationship that ended was a raft that got you somewhere. It taught you something, showed you something about yourself, brought you to a new shore. But now it's over. Carrying it forward, replaying it, analyzing it, wishing it were different, is like dragging the raft on your back while trying to walk inland. The disappointment you experienced, the plan that fell apart, the person who hurt you, these were all part of crossing a particular stretch of river. They happened. They're part of your history. They shaped you in some way, but they're not meant to be carried indefinitely. The Buddha taught that everything has its time, and then it's time to be released. This doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending something didn't matter. It means recognizing when you've extracted whatever learning or growth was available, and then consciously choosing not to keep reliving it. But here's why this is so difficult. Your mind doesn't want to let go. Not because it's trying to hurt you, but because it's trying to protect you through a deeply flawed strategy. Your mind holds on to familiar pain because the unfamiliar feels dangerous. At least with this pain, you know what to expect. You know how it feels. You know how to function around it. You've built your life with this pain as a constant. Letting it go means stepping into unknown territory, and the mind interprets unknown as threatening. Your mind holds onto memories because they keep the past alive, and sometimes the past feels safer than the present. If you can keep replaying how things used to be, you don't have to fully face how things are now. The memory becomes a refuge from reality. Your mind holds on to people even after they've left, because losing them feels like losing part of yourself. If you defined yourself through that relationship, if your sense of worth was tied to their presence, then letting them go means not knowing who you are without them. And that unknown identity feels more frightening than the pain of holding on. In Buddhist teaching, this is called avijja, ignorance, but not in the sense of lacking information. It's more like a fundamental misperception, a not seeing clearly. The mind doesn't see things as they actually are. It sees them through filters of fear, desire, past conditioning, future anxiety. It mistakes the impermanent for permanent, believing that if you hold tight enough, things won't change. It mistakes suffering for comfort, because familiar suffering feels less threatening than unfamiliar peace. It mistakes the changing nature of identity for a fixed self, believing you are the person you were, in that relationship, in that job, in that version of your life, rather than recognizing you're always becoming someone new. This ignorance isn't your fault. It's the default setting of an unexamined mind. The mind evolved to keep you alive, not to keep you peaceful. So it clings to what's familiar, even when what's familiar is painful. But you can train the mind differently, not by forcing it, not by hating it for its patterns, but through patient, repeated practice. The Buddha called this bhavana, cultivation, development, the gradual strengthening of wholesome qualities through regular practice. Think of it like training a muscle. The first time you try to lift something heavy, you might not be able to do it. But if you practice regularly, gradually, the muscle strengthens. Eventually, what once felt impossible becomes natural. Letting go works the same way. The first time you notice your mind returning to someone who's gone, it might take everything in you to redirect your attention. The pull might be overwhelming, but you do it anyway, gently, without judgment, just noticing and redirecting. The 100th time, it's slightly easier. The 500th time, there's less resistance. Eventually, the mind stops returning as often because the neural pathway you're creating, the one that leads away from rumination and toward presence, becomes stronger than the old pathway. This is the practice of letting go, not a single dramatic release, but 1,000 small redirections. When you practice letting go, you're releasing the emotional grip, not the memory itself. The memory can remain without you being imprisoned by it. You're releasing the demand that reality should have been different, not the awareness that it was difficult. You begin to recognize that holding on doesn't protect you. It doesn't keep you connected to what you've lost. It doesn't honor what mattered. It just prolongs the suffering. You begin to accept that life moves in cycles. Everything has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Relationships begin, and sometimes they complete. Circumstances arise, and eventually they change. Even your own identity is not fixed. Who you are evolves continuously. Resisting this natural flow is what creates the suffering, not the change itself, but your resistance to it. The practice becomes very specific. When someone says something hurtful, you learn not to internalize it immediately. You create a small gap between their words and your reaction. In that gap, you ask, is this about me, or is this about them? Is this truth I need to hear, or is this their own pain speaking? You learn to let words pass through without letting them define you. When circumstances shift unexpectedly, you learn not to fall apart. You feel the disappointment, acknowledge the difficulty, and then you ask, what can I do from here? What's actually within my influence? You stop wasting energy fighting what's already happened and redirect that energy toward what's possible now. When relationships fade, you learn not to chase. You recognize when someone is moving in a different direction. You honor what was shared. Without demanding it, continue beyond its natural completion. You let people walk their own path, even when that path leads away from you. You begin to understand that not everything requires a reaction. Not everything needs closure in the way you once thought it did. Not everything is worth fighting to keep. Some things are meant to pass through your life, to teach you something, to shape you in some way, and then to leave. The practice is learning to honor the passage without clinging to the presence. The Buddha once said something beautifully simple. Letting go gives us freedom, and freedom is the only condition for happiness. Not achievement, not approval, not getting what you want. Freedom. The freedom that comes from no longer being controlled by your attachments, your fears, your need for things to be different than they are. This freedom doesn't arrive all at once. It grows gradually through practice, through the daily choice to release rather than grasp, to accept rather than resist, to trust the process rather than control the outcome. And as this practice deepens, something shifts in how you experience life. You still feel everything: joy, sadness, love, loss, but you're no longer imprisoned by what you feel. You can experience life fully without being destroyed by its changes. The practice of letting go cultivates emotional independence. Not isolation, not detachment from care, but independence from the need for life to be other than it is. What the Buddha saw goes even deeper than learning to let go. He saw something about the nature of control itself, about what you can actually influence and what you've been exhausting yourself trying to manage. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from trying to manage what was never yours to manage. You wake up with chronic pain and spend the day fighting your body, angry that it won't cooperate, resentful that this is your reality. You watch a friend make a choice you know will hurt them, and you exhaust yourself trying to convince them otherwise. as if your clarity should override their agency. You get criticism at work and lie awake replaying the conversation, searching for what you should have said to make them see you differently. You're trying to change your body's response to stress. You're trying to alter another adult's decision-making. You're trying to rewrite someone's perception of you after the fact. And underneath all of this is a belief so deep you might not even recognize it. The belief that reality should bend to your preferences, that the world should rearrange itself according to your understanding of how things ought to be. But reality doesn't work that way. It unfolds according to causes and conditions, most of which you cannot see and will never control. Your body responds to decades of patterns, genetics, environmental factors, stress levels accumulated over years. Your friend makes choices based on their history, their fears, their needs, their understanding, none of which you can override with logic. Your colleague's perception of you is filtered through their own experiences, insecurities, expectations, things that existed long before you entered the picture. The Buddha pointed to something radical. Most of your suffering doesn't come from these realities themselves. It comes from your refusal to accept them. He taught this through an image that's been repeated for 25 centuries because it's so precisely accurate. Imagine you're walking through the forest and an arrow strikes you. Maybe it was shot by a hunter who mistook you for an animal. Maybe it fell from somewhere above. It doesn't matter how it happened. It's there, embedded in your shoulder, and it hurts. This is the first arrow. This is the pain that life delivers simply because you're alive and vulnerable. Your body develops an illness. Someone you trusted betrays that trust. A project you invested months in falls apart. Your aging parent doesn't recognize you anymore. These are first arrows. They hurt. The pain is real and unavoidable. Now imagine that while you're standing there with the first arrow in your shoulder, you pick up a second arrow and drive it into the exact same wound. The pain intensifies dramatically, not because the second arrow is worse than the first, but because you're deliberately striking an already injured place. This is what you do with your mind. This is the suffering you create on top of the inevitable pain. Your body develops chronic pain. That's the first arrow. It's difficult. It's limiting. It changes how you move through the world. But then you shoot the second arrows. This shouldn't be happening to me. I must have done something to deserve this. My life is over. I can't be happy like this. Why won't my body just work properly? Other people don't have to deal with this. Each thought is another wound you're inflicting on yourself. The pain was there regardless. That's the first arrow. That's life. But the suffering, the mental anguish, the spiral of resistance, that's the second arrow, and that's optional. Your child makes a choice you fundamentally disagree with. First arrow. You feel worried, disappointed, concerned for their well-being. That's natural. Second arrows. They're doing this to hurt me. I failed as a parent. Everyone will blame me for how they turned out. I should have been stricter, or more lenient, or more present. This reflects on me. They should listen to my experience. Now you're suffering not just from concern for them, but from self-blame, from making their choices about you, from the belief that you should be able to control another person's path. A storm cancels your long-planned trip. First arrow. Disappointment, frustration with the timing, the practical difficulties of rescheduling. Second arrows. This always happens to me. Nothing ever works out the way it should. I can't catch a break. The universe is against me. This ruined everything. You've just transformed a weather event into evidence of cosmic persecution. That's the second arrow. The story you tell about what happened, the meaning you assign to it, the resistance to what simply is. The Buddha's teaching here is simple, but requires real honesty to apply. You cannot control the first arrow. You cannot prevent all pain, all loss, all difficulty. Life includes these things. Bodies break down, plans fall apart, people act from their own needs, circumstances shift in ways you didn't choose. But you can stop shooting the second arrows. You can stop the mental resistance that transforms pain into prolonged suffering. This doesn't mean you don't feel the pain. It doesn't mean you become numb or indifferent. It means you feel what's actually there without adding layers of story, resistance, and self-inflicted anguish on top of it. When you stop resisting what's already happened, something shifts. The pain may remain. First arrows don't disappear just because you accept them, but the suffering decreases because you're no longer fighting reality. The Buddha taught about how things come into existence, a teaching about causes and conditions. Everything that arises does so because countless factors have come together in a particular way. Your body's current state arose from genetics, past choices, environmental exposure, stress patterns, age, injury, countless factors you may never fully understand. You cannot think your way into a different body. You cannot force different conditions into existence through willpower alone. Someone else's thoughts and feelings arise from their entire history, their childhood, their wounds, their beliefs, their current circumstances, their biochemistry, factors you cannot see and will never control. You cannot make someone think differently about you by sheer force of wanting it. Events unfold according to conditions, economic forces, weather patterns, other people's schedules, mechanical failures, timing, chance encounters, variables far beyond your influence. You cannot script reality like a movie where you control all the actors and all the circumstances. This isn't pessimistic. It's accurate. And accuracy is where peace begins. Because when you truly understand that these things arise from conditions you don't control, you stop taking them personally. You stop interpreting your chronic pain as punishment. You stop making your friend's choice about your worth as an advisor. You stop seeing the storm as evidence that you're cursed. Things happen because conditions came together in that way. That's all. But here's where this teaching becomes practical. While you cannot control most of what happens around you, you can work with the causes and conditions in your own mind. You can influence your responses, your intentions, your attention, your discipline, your boundaries, the meanings you assign to events. These are the areas where wise effort actually makes a difference. You cannot control whether your body has pain, but you can practice not resisting the pain, not making it mean something about your worth, not letting it consume all your attention. You can work with physical therapy, medication, gentle movement, the conditions you can actually influence. You cannot control your friend's choices, but you can decide how much energy you give to worry, whether you maintain the friendship. Despite disagreeing, how you speak to them about your concerns, without demanding they comply. You cannot control criticism, but you can examine whether it contains truth worth considering. Practice, not internalizing it as a verdict on your existence. Choose how you respond, rather than react automatically. This is what the Buddha meant by right effort. One aspect of the path he taught. Not effort to control everything, but effort applied where effort actually works. Effort in training your own mind, not in changing reality to match your preferences. There's a word in the ancient language, yathabhuta, that means seeing things as they actually are, not through the filter of how you wish they were, not through fear or hope or memory, but as they are right now, in this moment. This clear seeing is what allows acceptance to arise. And acceptance is not resignation or passivity. It's the foundation for intelligent action. When you stop fighting what's already true, energy becomes available. The energy you were pouring into resistance, into replaying the past, into arguing with reality, that energy returns to you. You can use it to work with what's actually in front of you, to adapt to new circumstances, to find solutions that work with reality instead of demanding reality be different first. When you accept that your body has limitations, you stop wasting energy, hating it, and start working with what's possible. Gentle movement instead of forcing, rest instead of pushing through, adaptation instead of denial. When you accept that you cannot control another person's path, you stop the exhausting cycle of persuasion and manipulation, and instead offer what you can, your perspective when asked, your presence without conditions, your care without demands. When you accept that circumstances don't always align with your timing, you stop personalizing delays and start responding practically. What needs to be rescheduled? What can be done differently? What's actually possible now? This acceptance brings a particular kind of relief. Your shoulders drop, your jaw unclenches. The constant argument running in the background of your mind finally quiets. You're no longer taking responsibility for things that were never your responsibility. The weather, other people's feelings, your body's biology, the timing of events, how others perceive you. You stop taking blame for what you didn't cause. Stop personalizing what has nothing to do with you. Stop fighting situations that have already resolved themselves. Peace doesn't come from getting what you want. It comes from accepting what is and working intelligently with it. This is not about cosmic timing or trusting the universe to guide you. It's simpler and more grounded than that. Things unfold according to natural law, according to causes and conditions coming together and coming apart. When you stop demanding they unfold differently, you can finally work with them as they are. And in that space between what happens and how you respond, that's where something profound becomes available. Watch what happens when you're stuck in traffic and someone cuts you off aggressively. Anger flares instantly. Your hands grip the steering wheel tighter. Your jaw clenches. And before you've even thought about it, you're yelling at a windshield, at someone who can't hear you and wouldn't care if they could. Or you open an unexpected bill, much higher than you anticipated. Panic floods your chest within seconds. Your mind immediately spirals into worst-case scenarios, playing out scenes of financial ruin before you've even finished reading the page. Or you're scrolling through social media and see someone celebrating an achievement you've been working toward for years. Jealousy rises like bile. Suddenly you're comparing, measuring, finding yourself lacking, feeling bitter about their success, even though you don't actually wish them harm. Most people move through life operated by emotions like puppets on strings. Anger pulls, they lash out. Fear pulls, they freeze or run. Sadness pulls, they collapse. Jealousy pulls, they diminish themselves or others. The emotion arises and action follows automatically, with no gap, no pause, no choice. Life becomes an exhausting cycle of reactivity, constantly responding to internal weather patterns as if they're external emergencies. The Buddha saw this pattern in his own mind before he taught it to anyone else. He discovered that emotions are visitors, not commanders. They arrive uninvited, stay for a while, and eventually leave. But they only have authority when you hand it to them. There's a series of stories about the Buddha that illustrate this. Stories about someone named Mara. Mara represents the mind's afflictions: fear, doubt, craving, aversion, the voice that tells you you're not enough, the pull toward what harms you, the resistance to what would help you. In the traditional stories, Mara appears as an external tempter, but the Buddha understood Mara as the movements of an unexamined mind. Even after the Buddha's awakening, even after he understood the nature of suffering and how to end it, Mara continued to visit. One afternoon, the Buddha was sitting quietly when Mara appeared. The disciples around him grew tense, waiting to see what would happen. The Buddha didn't fight. He didn't try to push Mara away or pretend he wasn't there. He didn't panic or spiral into doubt. He simply looked at Mara calmly and said, "I see you, Mara. Then, in some versions of the story, he said something even more surprising. "Come, sit, have some tea." He acknowledged what was present without giving it power. He didn't engage with Mara's provocations, didn't argue with the doubts or fears Mara presented, didn't fight against what was arising in his awareness. He just saw it clearly. This is doubt arising. This is fear present. This is old conditioning appearing again. And when Mara was seen clearly, without resistance or engagement, he had no power. He would simply fade away, like mist in sunlight. Your emotions work the same way. Anger visits, fear visits, sadness, jealousy, anxiety, irritation, they all visit. They arise from conditions, something you saw, something someone said, a memory that surfaced, a sensation in your body, a worry about the future. The Buddha didn't teach suppression, slamming the door on these visitors while they're still present. That's still engagement, still reactivity, just pointing in a different direction. And he didn't teach obedience, following every command, acting on every impulse these emotions bring. That's handing over control completely. He taught something more nuanced. Acknowledge them, observe them clearly, and let them pass through without being controlled by them. I see you, anger. I see you, fear. I see you, jealousy. This simple act of clear seeing shifts everything. When you're driving and anger arises, you can notice, anger is here. My chest is tight, my hands are gripping, there's heat in my face. You're observing the anger without becoming it, without letting it dictate your next action. When you open that unexpected bill and panic floods in, you can notice panic is present. There's a squeezing sensation. Thoughts are racing. The body wants to move. You're aware of the panic without being swept away by it. When jealousy arises while scrolling, you can notice jealousy is here. There's comparison happening. There's a sense of lack. The mind is creating a story about not being enough. You're seeing the jealousy without believing everything it tells you. This is what the Buddha called sati, mindfulness, which simply means clear awareness of what's happening as it's happening. It creates a space between the emotion arising and your response to it. In that pause, choice becomes possible. Emotions arise automatically. They come from conditions largely outside your immediate control. Something happens. Biochemical responses occur, neural patterns, fire, and suddenly fear or anger or sadness is present. You don't choose which emotions arise any more than you choose which weather patterns move through the sky. But your response to the emotion, whether you act from it, speak from it, identify with it, that response can be chosen, even though it doesn't feel that way at first. When anger is present, you don't have to speak from it. You can feel the heat of it. Notice the urge to lash out and choose not to follow that urge. You can let the anger be there while you decide how to respond to the situation that triggered it. When fear is present, you don't have to run from it. You can feel the acceleration in your chest, notice the thoughts spinning toward catastrophe, and choose to stay present instead of following fear's command to flee or freeze. When sadness is present, you don't have to collapse under it. You can feel the weight of it, acknowledge the grief or disappointment, and choose to remain functional while sadness moves through. The Buddha called this approach the middle way, not suppressing emotions, not being controlled by them, but finding the path between these two extremes. Suppression creates pressure. You're constantly using energy to keep emotions pushed down, out of sight, denied. But they don't disappear. They just leak out in different ways or build until they explode. Reactivity creates chaos. You're constantly being thrown around by whatever emotion happens to be strongest in the moment. You say things you regret, make decisions from panic or anger, burn through relationships because every feeling demands immediate expression. The middle way is observation. The emotion can be present, fully felt, completely acknowledged, and you can still choose your response to the situation that triggered it. Think about emotions as weather patterns moving through a vast sky. Storms come, bringing wind and rain and thunder. Calm stretches come, bringing stillness and clarity. Neither weather pattern changes the nature of the sky itself. The sky remains spacious, open, unchanged by what moves through it. You are the sky. The emotions are weather. When you identify as the weather, I am angry, I am anxious, I am sad, you're caught in it, tossed around by it, controlled by it. When you observe as the sky, anger is present, anxiety is moving through, sadness has arrived. You maintain your ground while the weather does what weather does. This doesn't mean you don't feel the emotions. You feel them completely, maybe even more fully than before, because you're not spending energy fighting them or being consumed by them. You're just not confusing the temporary weather for your permanent nature. The practice becomes very specific in daily life. Your teenager slams a door and shouts something hurtful. Hurt and anger flare immediately. In that moment, you can pause. Notice, hurt is here, anger is rising. There's an urge to yell back or punish. And then you can choose, is responding from anger going to help this situation, or will waiting until the anger settles allow for a more useful conversation? Your coworker takes credit for your idea in a meeting. Indignation and betrayal surge. You can notice strong feelings are present. There's a desire to call them out publicly. Thoughts are spiraling about fairness. And then you can choose what response actually serves your interests here, as opposed to what emotion is demanding right now. You make a mistake that costs money or time or reputation. Shame crashes over you. You can notice shame is intense, There's a thought that I'm incompetent. The body wants to hide. And then you can choose, is this shame accurate feedback, or is it old conditioning triggering? And either way, what constructive action is possible from here? This pause, this space of observation before action, prevents enormous amounts of suffering. Imagine how many conflicts would never escalate if both people paused before speaking from anger. How many decisions would be different if made from clarity rather than panic? How many relationships would remain intact if people didn't act on every jealous or insecure impulse? The Buddha also taught something important about why people react to you the way they do. When someone lashes out at you, criticizes you, withdraws from you, treats you poorly, their behavior is arising from their own inner weather, their own unexamined emotions, their own wounds and fears and conditioning. It's almost never actually about you. It's about what's moving through them. When you understand this, you stop taking things so personally. Someone's anger at you is their anger finding an outlet. You happen to be there when it needed expression. Someone's coldness toward you is their own fear or hurt manifesting as distance. You triggered something in them that existed long before you arrived. This doesn't mean their behavior is acceptable or that you shouldn't have boundaries. It means you don't need to internalize their emotional weather as evidence of your worth or lack thereof. When you stop absorbing everyone else's emotional states, when you stop letting every reaction pull you into a painful story, you reclaim enormous amounts of energy and peace. You become steady, not rigid, not closed, not unfeeling, but steady. The emotions still come, the feelings still move through, but they no longer throw you off balance. The Buddha once said something that sounds radical until you experience it. You yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. Part of that love is refusing to let every emotion command you into actions you'll regret. Part of that affection is creating space between feeling and reacting, so you can respond from wisdom rather than impulse. When you develop this capacity to observe without becoming, something shifts in how you move through the world. You're no longer at the mercy of internal weather patterns. You can feel everything without being controlled by anything. And as this steadiness develops, you begin to see other people more clearly, not through the filter of your reactions to them, but as they actually are. There's a strange phenomenon that happens when you finally stop trying so hard with someone. When you stop chasing their approval, stop accommodating their inconsistency, stop making excuses for behavior that doesn't match their words, suddenly, you see them clearly for the first time. It's not that they changed. They were always this way. You just couldn't see it through the fog of your attachment. Attachment functions like a distortion field around perception. When you need someone, need them to validate you, need them to stay, need them to be who you want them to be, your mind automatically adjusts what you see to match what you need to believe. You excuse disrespect by telling yourself they're just stressed. You overlook inconsistency by focusing on their potential instead of their patterns. You tolerate being treated as an option because you're terrified of being alone. You interpret mixed signals as mysterious depth rather than simple ambivalence. Your vision becomes selective. You magnify the moments when they're present and minimize the months when they're absent. You remember their apologies and forget that the same behavior keeps repeating. You focus on how they make you feel in rare good moments and ignore how they treat you consistently. This isn't because you're naive or foolish. It's because attachment creates a survival instinct in the mind. The mind believes it needs this person or situation, so it protects that belief by filtering reality. But when you detach, when you step back even slightly from the desperate need, the fog lifts, and what you see can be startling. 7 years after the Buddha left his palace, he returned to his father's kingdom. He'd left as Prince Siddhartha, a young man expected to rule, to continue a dynasty, to fulfill his father's dreams for him. He'd left behind his wife, his infant son, his future as a king. He returned as the Buddha, someone who had found liberation from suffering and now taught others the path. He was no longer the person his father remembered or expected him to be. When King Suddhodana saw his son approaching the palace, decades of anger and hurt surfaced immediately. "You abandoned your duty," the king said, his voice shaking. "You left your wife to raise your son alone. You walked away from your responsibilities, from your family, from everything I built for you. Do you understand what you did to us?" The Buddha stood quietly, listening. He didn't defend himself or explain his reasons. He didn't argue about duty or try to justify his choice. He simply observed his father's pain with clear, compassionate awareness. He could see what was actually happening. His father was suffering from attachment to an image that no longer existed. King Suddhodana was speaking to Prince Siddhartha, demanding that person return, clinging to who his son had been. But Prince Siddhartha was gone. That version of himself had dissolved years ago beneath the Bodhi tree. The person standing before the king was fundamentally different, transformed by understanding suffering and its cessation. The Buddha's detachment, not from his father, but from his father's expectations and projections, allowed him to see this clearly. This anger wasn't really about him. It was about his father's inability to accept change, his father's attachment to a particular future, his father's suffering from demanding that reality be different than it was. He didn't take the anger personally, because he could see where it was actually coming from. The Buddha simply said, "I understand your pain, and I cannot be who I was. That person no longer exists. If you can see who I am now, we can know each other truly. If you cannot, we will both suffer from trying to force something that isn't real." King Suddhodana stood in silence for a long time. Slowly, his anger began to crack. Beneath it was grief. Grief for the son he'd imagined, the future he'd planned, the continuity he'd expected. But as his attachment to that imagined future began to loosen, he started to see his son clearly, not as the role he wanted filled, but as the person actually standing before him. In the weeks that followed, their relationship deepened in a way it never had when the Buddha was still Prince Siddhartha, because now it was based on truth rather than projection, on who they actually were, rather than who they were supposed to be. This is what happens when you detach. You stop projecting onto people who you need them to be and start seeing who they actually are. When you're attached, you see people through the filter of your hopes. This person will finally give you the love your parents didn't. This friend will provide the loyalty you've been seeking. This mentor will guide you the way you've always needed. You're relating to your projection, not to the actual person. And when the actual person behaves differently than your projection, you feel betrayed, even though they never agreed to be your projection in the first place. Detachment allows you to see the pattern, not just the promise. You start noticing who reaches out consistently versus who only contacts you when they need something. Who shows up when your life gets difficult versus who disappears when you're no longer entertaining or useful. Who celebrates your growth versus who subtly undermines it. You begin to see the difference between someone who respects your boundaries and someone who resents them, between someone who values honest conversation and someone who's only comfortable when you're agreeable, between someone who treats you with consistency and someone who treats you based on convenience. The Buddha called this vipassana, clear seeing, penetrative insight, seeing through appearances to what's actually present. It's not about judging people as good or bad. It's about seeing them accurately, their patterns, their capacity, their actual behavior versus their stated intentions. You begin to notice that someone says they value the friendship but never initiates contact, never remembers what you've shared, never makes space in their life for you, unless it's convenient for them. The words say one thing, the behavior shows another. And behavior is what's true. You see that someone gets defensive every time you express a need, making you feel guilty for having needs at all. This isn't a misunderstanding to be worked through. It's a pattern that reveals something about their capacity for reciprocal relationship. You notice that someone is warm and engaged when things are going well, but cold and distant when you're struggling. Their support is conditional, available only when you're in a state that's easy for them to be around. Once you see these patterns clearly, you cannot unsee them. You can choose to stay, you can choose to adjust your expectations, but you cannot go back to the fog of not knowing. The ancient Buddhist texts describe this as yathabhuta jnana, knowledge of things as they actually are, unfiltered by desire or aversion, uncolored by what you wish were true. This clear seeing can be uncomfortable at first. It's easier to live in the fog, easier to maintain illusions, easier to pretend that people are who you need them to be, rather than accepting who they actually are. But the discomfort of truth is temporary. The suffering of delusion is ongoing. When you see clearly, you can make decisions based on reality. You stop investing in relationships that only exist in your imagination. You stop waiting for people to become who they've never shown signs of becoming. You stop accommodating treatment that doesn't serve your well-being just because you're afraid of being alone. The Buddha taught something important about genuine connection. It arises naturally when conditions are right. Healthy relationships don't require force. They don't require you to constantly accommodate, convince, chase, or diminish yourself to maintain them. They grow from mutual respect, shared values, and genuine care that flows in both directions. When you detach, and someone who truly values you sees that shift, they respond with curiosity, with effort to understand, with appreciation for your honesty. The relationship often becomes more authentic because both people can finally be real instead of performing roles. But when you detach from someone whose connection depended on your attachment, on your neediness, your accommodation, your willingness to accept less than you deserve, they often become resentful. Your freedom reveals what the relationship was actually built on. And if it was built on imbalance, on one person giving far more than the other, on one person molding themselves to keep the peace, then detachment exposes that foundation as unsustainable. People who benefited from your attachment will sometimes interpret your detachment as betrayal. They'll say, "You've changed, you've become cold, you're not who you used to be." And they're right. You're not who you used to be. You're no longer someone who abandons their own needs to maintain a relationship that doesn't nourish them. You're no longer someone who accepts inconsistency or disrespect out of fear. Your clarity shifts the questions you ask yourself. Instead of, "Why did they say that?" you ask, "What does their consistent behavior actually show?" Instead of, "How can I make them understand me?" you ask, "Do they demonstrate genuine interest in understanding me?" Instead of, "What did I do wrong?" you ask, "Is this person capable of the kind of relationship I'm seeking?" The Buddha taught that those who truly belong in your life will meet you where you are. They won't require you to be less than yourself to keep them comfortable. They won't punish you for growing or changing. They won't resent your boundaries or demand constant accommodation. And those who cannot meet you there, who need you small, who need you accommodating, who need you attached in order to maintain the relationship, those people are not aligned with your path forward. Letting them go, or letting the relationship shift into something more honest, even if smaller, is not cruelty. It's clarity. The Buddha once said something beautifully simple. 3 things cannot be long hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. Truth eventually reveals itself. You can only maintain illusions for so long before reality breaks through. And when it does, you have a choice. Continue fighting to maintain the illusion, or accept what's true and work with that. Detachment is what allows you to choose truth. Not because it makes you cold or indifferent, but because it clears the fog that kept you seeing what you needed to see instead of what was actually there. This clarity raises a question that stops many people from detaching at all. If I stop needing people, stop trying so hard, stop caring whether they stay or go, will I become cold? Will I lose my capacity to love? Will I end up isolated and alone? The Buddha spoke directly to this fear. The word detachment carries unfortunate associations in common usage. It sounds clinical, distant, like the emotional equivalent of anesthesia, numbing yourself so you don't feel anything at all. People hear, "let go," and imagine building walls around their hearts. They picture becoming someone who doesn't care, doesn't engage, doesn't allow themselves to be moved by anything or anyone. They fear that protecting themselves from suffering means cutting themselves off from love. This misunderstanding keeps many people trapped in painful attachment. They'd rather suffer from clinging than risk becoming cold. But Buddhist detachment is the opposite of what most people imagine. It doesn't strip you of your humanity, it returns you to it. It doesn't harden your heart, it softens you in the places that matter, while making you steady in the places that need strength. It doesn't make you love less, it allows you to love more purely, more freely, without the distortions that fear and desperation create. When the Buddha talked about letting go of attachment, he wasn't talking about becoming emotionally unavailable or withdrawn from life. He was talking about removing the contamination that makes love painful, the fear of loss, the need to possess, the demand for permanence, the insistence that people remain exactly as you need them to be. After the Buddha's enlightenment, after years of teaching throughout India, he encountered his son Rahula again. Rahula was no longer the infant the Buddha had left behind. He was now a young boy, old enough to understand that his father had abandoned the family, old enough to feel the absence, old enough to have questions. When they met, the Buddha could have approached this reunion in two equally problematic ways. He could have been consumed with guilt and shame, overcompensating through excessive attachment, trying to make up for lost time by clinging desperately to whatever relationship they might build. This would have burdened Rahula with the responsibility of healing his father's regret. Or he could have maintained cold distance, treating Rahula formally like any other student, denying the significance of their blood relationship, avoiding the discomfort of facing what his choices had cost his son. This would have added abandonment upon abandonment. The Buddha did neither. He loved Rahula completely and allowed Rahula complete freedom. He ordained Rahula as a young monk and taught him directly, spending time with him, offering guidance, answering questions, treating him with the care and attention a father might give a son. But he didn't cling to a particular vision of who Rahula should become or what their relationship should look like. One of the teachings the Buddha gave Rahula has been preserved, a teaching about impermanence, delivered with extraordinary tenderness. He said, "Rahula, all conditioned things are impermanent. Everything that comes together will eventually come apart. Your body will age and change. Your mind will develop and shift. People you love will come into your life and leave your life. Even our relationship, even this moment between us right now, is already changing, already moving toward its end." To some, this might sound like the Buddha was being harsh with a child, teaching him about death and loss and impermanence, when he should have been offering comfort and security. But it was the opposite. The Buddha was giving Rahula the truth that would prevent decades of unnecessary suffering. He was teaching him not to expect permanence from what cannot be permanent, not to build his happiness on the foundation of things staying the same forever. This wasn't coldness. It was preparation. It was equipping someone you love with the understanding they need to navigate reality without constantly breaking against it. And the result was remarkable. Rahula became one of the Buddha's most devoted students, known for his humility and dedication to practice. Their relationship deepened over years, not because the Buddha clung to his son, demanded a particular kind of connection, or tried to control how Rahula felt about him. It deepened because the love was spacious rather than possessive, offered freely rather than conditionally, grounded in reality rather than fantasy about how father and son relationships are supposed to look. This is what Buddhist attachment actually means: loving without the desperate grip that transforms love into suffering. The Buddha taught 4 qualities that belong together, that actually strengthen each other rather than contradicting. In the ancient texts, they're called the 4 immeasurables. Immeasurable because they can be extended limitlessly in all directions toward all beings, including yourself. Metta, loving kindness, the genuine wish for others to be happy and free from suffering. Karuna, compassion, the feeling of care that arises when witnessing suffering, accompanied by the wish to help alleviate it. Mudita, sympathetic joy, the ability to feel genuine happiness at others' good fortune and success rather than envy or comparison. Upekkha, equanimity, the balanced awareness that allows you to care deeply without being thrown off balance by constantly changing circumstances. Most people think these qualities oppose each other. They think you can either care intensely or maintain balance, that you can either love deeply or protect yourself from suffering, that you're either attached or indifferent. But the Buddha taught they all belong together. You can hold all 4 simultaneously, and in fact, each one becomes healthier when supported by the others. Loving kindness without equanimity becomes overwhelming, drowning you in others' pain, making you responsible for fixing everything. Equanimity without loving kindness becomes cold indifference, using detachment as an excuse to not care, to not engage, to protect yourself by withdrawing. But when you hold both together, when you genuinely care about someone's well-being and accept that you cannot control their choices, their path, their suffering, you can love freely without suffering from that love. This is the difference between attachment and authentic care. Attachment says, "I love you," which means I need you to be a certain way. I need you to stay close, to validate me, to provide what I lack, to fill the emptiness I feel. My happiness depends on you not changing, not leaving, not making choices that disturb my sense of security. That's not love. It's dependence, wearing love's costume. It's fear, pretending to be affection. And it creates instability because it ties your internal state to another person's choices, moods, and presence, all things outside your control. Real loving kindness says, "I genuinely wish for your well-being, your growth, your freedom. I celebrate your presence in my life, without demanding you remain present forever. I care about your happiness without making myself responsible for creating it. I can hold you with an open hand rather than a closed fist." The Buddha taught that this kind of love can be extended boundlessly toward people you know intimately, toward strangers you pass on the street, toward people who've harmed you, toward yourself. Radiate boundless love toward the entire world, he said, above, below, and across, unhindered, without ill will, without enmity. Notice what's absent from this instruction. There's no clause about only love people who deserve it, or only if they love you back, or unless they've hurt you. The love the Buddha described doesn't depend on anyone's behavior, doesn't require reciprocation, doesn't need to be earned or maintained through performance. It's a stance you take toward existence itself, a way of being in the world that benefits you as much as anyone else. When you love without attachment, several things become possible that weren't possible before. You stop needing constant reassurance that you're loved back. The love exists independent of proof, independent of reciprocation. You can love someone who's not capable of loving you the way you'd prefer, and that reality becomes sad, but not devastating. You stop interpreting silence as rejection. Someone can be quiet, distant, preoccupied, without you turning that into evidence of your inadequacy or their abandonment. You stop trying to control outcomes. You can hope things work out a certain way without collapsing when they work out differently. You can want someone to make a particular choice while accepting their right to choose differently. You stop forcing connections that require constant effort to maintain. Real care flows naturally when conditions support it. When you're constantly pushing, convincing, accommodating, proving your worth, that's not love meeting love. That's attachment meeting indifference. The Buddha pointed towards something he called Buddha nature, the fundamental wholeness that exists beneath all the conditioning, all the fear, all the learned patterns of grasping and aversion. Attachment is something you learned. Wholeness is what you are. You weren't born clinging desperately to people, terrified of loss, needing constant validation to feel worthy. You learned these patterns from experiences of abandonment, rejection, inconsistent love, from a world that taught you your value was conditional. But underneath all that learning, there's a natural state of being, naturally capable of joy, naturally compassionate towards suffering, naturally at peace when not caught in mental storms. When attachment drops away, not through force or suppression, but through understanding its nature and seeing it clearly, you don't become less than you were. You return to something more fundamental. You discover you can be fully present with someone without losing yourself in them. You can care deeply about their well-being without making yourself responsible for their happiness. You can feel grief at loss without being destroyed by it. You can love with your whole heart while understanding that all meetings end in parting. This is what the Buddha meant by spiritual maturity, the capacity to remain open-hearted without being easily broken, to feel everything without being controlled by what you feel, to engage fully with life while understanding its nature. You become both strong and soft simultaneously, strong enough to face reality as it is, soft enough to be touched by beauty and moved by suffering, grounded enough to stay steady through change, flexible enough to adapt when circumstances shift. This isn't something you achieve and then possess forever. It's a quality you cultivate through practice that deepens gradually through repeated choice, choosing presence over clinging, choosing truth over comforting illusions, choosing care without control. And as this quality strengthens, the way you move through the world shifts fundamentally. You stop performing versions of yourself designed to maintain approval. You stop accommodating behavior that doesn't serve genuine connection. You stop betraying your own needs to keep others comfortable. You become authentic in a way that's only possible when you're no longer terrified of how authenticity will be received. There's a particular exhaustion that comes from constantly justifying your existence to people who've already decided how they want to see you. You explain why you need distance from a relationship that's draining you. You defend your decision to change careers, to move cities, to set a boundary that protects your well-being. You justify why you can't accommodate someone's request, why you said no, why you chose differently than they expected. And after you've explained thoroughly, presented your reasons logically, made your case as clearly as possible, they still don't understand. Or worse, they understand perfectly, but resent you anyway. Most people don't realize how much energy this consumes until they finally stop doing it. The constant internal rehearsal of explanations, the mental arguments with people who aren't even present, the pressure to make your choices acceptable to others before you can feel okay about them yourself. The Buddha taught about taking refuge, finding a stable ground to stand on when everything around you is shifting. He offered 3 refuges: the Buddha himself as an example of awakening, the teachings he discovered about the nature of suffering and its end, and the community of others practicing this path. Notice what's absent from this list: other people's understanding of your choices, their approval of your boundaries, their validation of your worth, their acceptance of your growth. When you seek refuge in whether people approve of you, you're building your stability on ground that shifts constantly. Their opinions change, their moods fluctuate, their capacity to understand is limited by their own experience and wounds. But when you find refuge in your own practice, in your understanding of what creates suffering and what creates peace, in your commitment to truth, even when it's uncomfortable, in the community of others who value awareness over performance, you're standing on something more stable. A wanderer once approached the Buddha with a series of questions that had been troubling him for years. Is the universe eternal or not eternal? He demanded. Is it finite or infinite? What happens to an enlightened being after death? Do they exist? Not exist? Both? Neither? Does the body contain the same life force as the mind? Or are they separate? These were considered the great philosophical questions of the time, debated endlessly by various teachers and spiritual schools. The wanderer had asked many teachers, received many different answers, and wanted to know what the Buddha thought. The Buddha remained silent. The wanderer pressed him. Why won't you answer? Every other teacher has a position on these questions. Are you uncertain? Do you not know? Or are you withholding the truth? The Buddha looked at him calmly and said, Suppose a man is struck by a poisoned arrow. His friends rush him to a doctor, but before the doctor can remove the arrow, the wounded man says, Wait. First, I need to know who shot this arrow. What caste was he born into? What kind of wood is the arrow made from? What feathers were used for the fletching? Which direction did it come from? What was the shooter's motivation? The wanderer frowned. That would be foolish. The man would die while asking these questions. The important thing is to remove the arrow. Exactly, the Buddha said. You're struck by the arrow of suffering right now. Dissatisfaction, anxiety, the feeling that something is fundamentally wrong. I can show you how to remove that arrow, but you're asking me metaphysical questions that won't help you at all. Whether the universe is eternal or not, you still suffer. Whether there's existence after death or not, you still suffer right now. I teach one thing only: suffering and the end of suffering. If a question doesn't lead toward the end of suffering, I remain silent about it. This story illustrates something important about when explanations are necessary and when they're a waste of your limited energy. Not every question deserves your answer. Not every misunderstanding deserves your correction. Not every criticism requires your defense. Some people ask questions not because they want to understand, but because they want ammunition, because they want to find fault, because they resent the choice you've made, and are searching for a reason to make you doubt yourself. Some people will never understand because they're not interested in understanding. They're attached to their interpretation, their judgment, their version of who you should be. And some situations simply don't require explanation. You don't owe everyone access to your reasoning, your process, your internal decision-making. Some things you do for yourself, from your own wisdom, and whether others approve is irrelevant. People who genuinely respect you don't demand constant justification. They may ask questions to understand better. They may express concern from genuine care, but they don't require you to convince them before accepting your choices. Your truth doesn't disappear when others don't understand it. It remains true regardless of who can see it. But the habit of excessive explaining usually comes from somewhere deeper than simple communication. It comes from fear. Fear of being judged, rejected, misunderstood, abandoned. Fear that if people see you as you actually are, making choices that prioritize your own well-being over their comfort, they'll decide you're selfish, cold, wrong. This fear reveals an attachment we explored earlier, the attachment to praise and aversion to blame, the deep discomfort of being disapproved of, the craving for everyone to see you as good. When you value external understanding more than internal peace, you contort yourself endlessly, trying to make your choices palatable to people whose approval shouldn't determine your path. The Buddha taught about finding refuge within, not in the sense of becoming self-centered or arrogant, but in the sense of trusting your own discernment, your own understanding of what creates suffering and what creates peace in your life. When you trust your own intentions, you can let others misunderstand without falling apart. You know why you made the choice you made. You know it came from care for yourself and sometimes for them, even if they can't see it that way. When you value inner peace more than external understanding, you can be misinterpreted without needing to launch an immediate defense. The truth of your motivation exists independent of their interpretation. Misunderstanding is uncomfortable, but it's not catastrophic. Not everyone is meant to walk your path with you. Some people will fundamentally disagree with choices that are right for you, and that's okay. Their path and yours don't have to align. People's reactions to your boundaries, your growth, your choices, these reactions tell you about their inner world, not about your worth. If someone becomes angry when you set a limit, that anger reveals their expectation of unlimited access to you, their discomfort with not being able to control your decisions, their own difficulty with hearing no. If someone withdraws when you stop accommodating them, that withdrawal reveals the relationship was built on what you provided, not on genuine care for who you are. If someone criticizes your choice to prioritize your well-being, that criticism reveals their belief that your needs should come after theirs, or their own inability to make similar choices for themselves. You're not responsible for managing these reactions. You're not obligated to explain until they feel comfortable with your autonomy. When you stop explaining yourself constantly, several things happen. Your relationships become clearer. You quickly see who respects your right to make your own choices versus who only respects choices they agree with? Who trusts your judgment versus who believes they know better than you what you need? Who supports your growth versus who preferred you when you were smaller, more accommodating, less boundaried? Your peace becomes steadier. You stop lying awake, replaying conversations, trying to find the perfect explanation that would have made them understand. You stop carrying guilt for setting boundaries. Stop apologizing for prioritizing your well-being. Stop feeling like you need permission to make choices about your own life. You stop feeling responsible for other people's emotional reactions to your decisions. They feel what they feel. That's their experience to have. You can have compassion for their disappointment without making it your job to eliminate it by abandoning what you need. The Buddha taught about skillful speech as part of the path toward ending suffering. He talked about speaking truthfully, speaking helpfully, speaking at the right time. But he also taught about silence, knowing when not to speak, recognizing when words won't help, understanding that some situations call for quiet presence rather than explanation or defense. Silence can be its own form of wisdom, not the silence of suppression or passive aggression, but the silence of someone who no longer needs to justify their existence to feel worthy. When you stop over-explaining, your inner voice becomes clearer. You're no longer drowning it out with the constant mental rehearsal of how to make yourself acceptable to others. You can hear your own wisdom, your own intuition, your own understanding of what your life requires. You begin living from refuge within, rather than validation without. Your choices come from your own discernment, rather than from what will maintain approval. Your boundaries come from genuine care for your well-being, rather than from fear of what others might think. The Buddha once said something that's often quoted but worth understanding in this context. Believe nothing, simply because you've heard it, even if it comes from religious texts or respected teachers, unless it agrees with your own reason and your own experience of what leads toward peace. This isn't encouraging blind skepticism or selfish individualism. It's pointing toward the importance of trusting your own capacity to discern what's true, what's helpful, what leads toward freedom. You can listen to others' perspectives, consider their concerns, remain open to feedback. But ultimately, you're the one living your life, walking your path, experiencing the consequences of your choices. And you have access to information about yourself that others will never have. Your history, your needs, your inner landscape, your understanding of what creates peace versus suffering in your particular life. When you stop abandoning that wisdom in favor of what others think you should do, you reclaim something fundamental, your own authority over your life. And this clarity about where you stand, this rootedness in your own practice, rather than others' opinions, allows for something the Buddha taught extensively: accepting people as they are, rather than exhausting yourself trying to change them. There's a particular exhaustion that's different from physical tiredness. different from mental fatigue, from work or study. It's the bone-deep weariness that comes from trying to change someone who has no interest in changing. You invest months, sometimes years, hoping they'll finally see the harm they're causing. You offer perspective, suggest therapy, point out patterns, give them books or articles that explain exactly what you're seeing. You're patient through their defensiveness, gentle when confronting their behavior, clear about what the relationship needs to become sustainable. You give chance after chance after chance, believing that eventually your care will inspire their transformation. Your patience will create their breakthrough. Your suffering will finally motivate them to do the work they need to do. But transformation doesn't work that way. People don't change because you want them to, because you need them to, because their current behavior hurts you. They change when they want to change, when their own suffering becomes motivation enough, when they decide for themselves that the cost of staying the same exceeds the discomfort of growth. Until that internal shift happens, your effort is just exhausting you while accomplishing nothing. The Buddha taught about karma, not as cosmic punishment or reward, but simply as the reality that each person creates their experience through their own actions, intentions, and choices. You cannot create someone else's karma for them. You cannot force their growth, manufacture their insight, or walk their path for them. Each person must do their own work, make their own choices, face their own consequences. When you exhaust yourself trying to change someone, you're attempting to override their karma, to control their path, to make them learn lessons they're not ready to learn. And it's as futile as trying to make the wind blow in a different direction. The Buddha had a cousin named Devadatta who grew up alongside him in the palace. They were close as children, trained together, shared the privileges of royal life. When the Buddha began teaching after his enlightenment, Devadatta eventually joined the monastic community. For a time, he was a devoted student, respected by others, appearing to make genuine progress on the path. But something shifted. Devadatta became consumed with ambition. He began to believe he should lead the community instead of the Buddha, that his understanding was superior, that he deserved the respect and attention the Buddha received. He approached the Buddha with a proposal: retire and allow Devadatta to lead the Sangha. The Buddha declined, explaining that leadership wasn't about ambition, but about understanding, and Devadatta wasn't ready. Devadatta's jealousy turned to hatred. He made 3 attempts to kill the Buddha. First, he hired archers to ambush him on a path. But when the archers saw the Buddha approaching, they found themselves unable to release their arrows, and instead confessed the plot. Next, Devadatta climbed to the top of a mountain the Buddha was known to walk beneath and rolled an enormous boulder down, trying to crush him. The boulder split on a rock, and only a small fragment struck the Buddha's foot, drawing blood, but causing no serious harm. Finally, Devadatta released a drunk elephant onto the path where the Buddha was walking, hoping it would trample him. But as the elephant charged forward, something in the Buddha's presence calmed it, and it stopped before reaching him. Through all of this, 3 murder attempts by his own cousin, someone he'd known since childhood, someone he'd welcomed into the community, the Buddha never retaliated. He didn't try to punish Devadatta, didn't attempt to change his mind through argument or persuasion, didn't spend energy trying to make Devadatta see reason. He simply observed. Devadatta is walking his own path. He's creating his own karma through his choices. I cannot walk that path for him. I can only make sure he doesn't harm others in the community. The Buddha continued to treat Devadatta with basic compassion. He didn't hate him, didn't seek revenge, didn't try to destroy his reputation. But he also didn't chase after him trying to fix him, didn't sacrifice the community's safety for the hope that Devadatta would change, didn't exhaust himself attempting to love Devadatta into transformation. He accepted Devadatta as he was dangerous, consumed by jealousy, unwilling to look at his own mind, and he maintained appropriate distance. If the Buddha himself couldn't change someone who didn't want to change, what makes you think you can? This isn't meant to be discouraging. It's meant to be liberating. You're not failing when someone doesn't transform in response to your care, your patience, your clear communication about what needs to shift. You're simply encountering the reality that each person creates their own path through their own choices. When you finally accept this, truly accept it, not just intellectually agree with it, you stop investing precious energy in battles you were never meant to fight. Acceptance doesn't mean approval. It doesn't mean you're okay with their behavior. Doesn't mean you think their choices are fine. Doesn't mean you're required to stay in relationship with them. Acceptance means seeing reality without the distortion of hope or illusion. It means recognizing patterns that have shown themselves repeatedly and believing those patterns more than the promises that accompany them. When you accept someone's consistent behavior without trying to mold it into something different, you see clearly for the first time. You see that the disrespect you keep experiencing isn't occasional stress. It's how they actually relate to people they think won't leave. You see that the inconsistency isn't mysterious or complicated. It's exactly what it looks like. Someone who engages when it's convenient and disappears when it requires effort. You see that the emotional unavailability you keep trying to heal isn't something you caused and can't be fixed by loving them better. It's their own unresolved work that only they can choose to address. The Buddha taught about seeing things as they actually are, without the filter of desire for them to be different. This clear seeing is what allows wise action. When you see clearly that someone is not going to change, you stop wasting energy, hoping they will. You stop giving chances that will be used the same way the previous chances were used. You stop explaining what they've proven they don't want to understand. People don't change because you suffer. Your pain doesn't motivate their growth. In fact, some people feel more comfortable when you're suffering, when you're the one always accommodating always understanding, always giving more chances, because your discomfort allows them to avoid facing their own. People don't evolve because you sacrifice yourself. Your self-betrayal, accepting less than you deserve, tolerating treatment that harms you, shrinking yourself to keep them comfortable, doesn't inspire anyone to be better. It just teaches them that your boundaries are negotiable and your needs are optional. Real change comes from within. It comes from someone deciding for themselves that how they're living doesn't work anymore, that their patterns are creating suffering they no longer want to endure, that the person they're being isn't who they want to become. Until they make that decision for themselves, your effort isn't helping them, it's just depleting you. When you stop trying to change people, something remarkable happens. Your energy returns. The energy you were pouring into analyzing their behavior, strategizing how to help them see, explaining the same things in different ways, hoping one formulation would finally land. All that energy becomes available for your own life, your own growth, your own peace. You stop investing in someone's potential and start responding to their reality. Potential is just fantasy if it never materializes into consistent behavior. You can acknowledge that someone could be different while accepting that they're choosing not to be. You stop trying to heal wounds you didn't create. Their childhood trauma, their past betrayals, their learned patterns of relating. These are real and they matter, but they're not yours to fix. You can have compassion for why someone is the way they are, without making it your responsibility to repair them. You stop carrying emotional labor that belongs to them, managing their reactions, protecting their ego, doing the reflection they won't do for themselves, feeling their feelings because they're numb to them. These are responsibilities they need to take on if they want to grow. You carrying them doesn't help anyone. The Buddha taught that each person must walk their own path. You can point towards something helpful. You can share what you've learned, offer perspective they might not see, suggest resources that helped you. But you cannot force someone to look where you're pointing. You cannot make them walk a path they're not ready to walk. Letting people be who they are, without pressure to become who you need them to be, gives you clarity about who actually belongs in your life. When you stop trying to change them, you see who naturally chooses growth and who chooses stagnation, who responds to feedback with reflection versus who becomes defensive at any suggestion that they could do things differently, who wants to understand your experience versus who needs you to be wrong so they can be right. You begin evaluating relationships based on consistent actions, not occasional promises, not on who they say they want to become, but on who they're actually being, day after day, month after month. And you realize that your job isn't to find people and fix them until they're capable of healthy relationship. Your job is to choose people who already treat you with respect, who already value honesty, who already take responsibility for their own growth. People who don't require transformation before they can meet you with basic care and consideration. When you accept that you cannot control another person's path, you stop personalizing their choices. Their decision to remain stuck isn't about your worth or your failure. It's about where they are on their own journey, what they're ready to face, what they're willing to lose in order to grow. The Buddha said something that sounds harsh, but contains profound respect for human autonomy. No one saves us but ourselves. No one can, and no one may. We ourselves must walk the path. This means you cannot save anyone else. You cannot do their work for them, cannot spare them the difficulty of growth, cannot carry them across terrain they need to cross themselves. And they cannot save you either. Your liberation is your own work. Your path is yours to walk. Your choices are yours to make. When you both understand this, relationships become cleaner, more honest, more sustainable. You can support each other without trying to fix each other. You can care about each other's well-being without making yourselves responsible for creating it. This acceptance, this deep recognition that each person walks their own path, prepares you for the final teaching, the one the Buddha returned to again and again throughout his years of teaching. The practice of releasing your attachment to how you think things should unfold and learning to work with how things actually are. Of all the forms of clinging the Buddha identified, one of the most difficult to release is attachment to how you believe things should unfold. You have a vision in your mind, how your career should progress, how your health should respond to treatment, how this creative project should be received when the right opportunity should appear. You've thought it through, planned carefully. It makes sense. It feels fair. It seems like the natural result of your effort. And then reality moves in a completely different direction. The job goes to someone less qualified. The treatment doesn't work as expected. The project you poured yourself into is met with indifference. The opportunity you've been waiting for never materializes, or it comes at the wrong time, in the wrong form, requiring you to choose between competing needs. Your suffering in these moments doesn't come primarily from what happened. It comes from the gap between what happened and what you were certain should have happened. This is where you torture yourself, replaying your decisions, searching for where you went wrong, trying to identify the exact moment when things diverged from the path you'd envisioned, as if finding that moment would allow you to go back and force reality into the shape you needed it to take. The Buddha taught that this demand for reality to match your expectations is one of the primary sources of ongoing suffering, not because having preferences or goals is wrong, but because you're placing your peace in something fundamentally uncertain, a future that hasn't happened yet, that depends on countless conditions you cannot control. A farmer came to the Buddha during a time of severe hardship. His only ox, the animal he depended on for plowing, for planting, for his entire livelihood, had died suddenly just before the planting season. Without the ox, he couldn't prepare his fields. Without planted fields, his crops failed completely. Then the drought came. Even the farmers with oxen watched their crops wither. But for this farmer, who had nothing planted anyway, the drought felt like mockery. Even if he'd had an ox, even if he'd managed to plant, the drought would have destroyed everything anyway. As if that weren't enough, his wife fell seriously ill. The money he would have used to buy another ox, to purchase seed for the next season, now went to healers and medicine. He came to the Buddha in desperation, his face lined with exhaustion and confusion. "Why is life punishing me?" he asked. "I've worked hard my entire life. I've been honest. I've harmed no one. I've provided for my family. What did I do to deserve this? Why is everything falling apart?" The Buddha looked at him with compassion. "Life isn't punishing you," he said gently. "These are conditions arising from other conditions, not rewards or punishments for your behavior." The farmer shook his head. "But it feels personal. It feels like I'm being targeted, like the universe has decided to destroy everything I've built." "Your ox died from natural causes. Old age, perhaps disease, the way all living things eventually die," the Buddha said. "The drought came from weather patterns, from the movement of wind and water, from conditions that existed long before you planted a single seed. Your wife's illness arose from causes in her body, from factors you cannot see or control. These things happened, and they're difficult. The pain of them is real. But you're not suffering just from these events. You're suffering from your belief that life should have been different, that you should have been spared, that your hard work should have guaranteed a different result." The farmer's voice broke. "But I did everything right. I worked hard. I planned well. I deserved success. This shouldn't be happening to me." The Buddha nodded. "You worked with the causes and conditions you could control. Your effort, your honesty, your care for your family. But countless other causes and conditions exist beyond your sight, beyond your influence. The health of oxen, weather patterns, the invisible processes in human bodies, these arise from factors you cannot manage, no matter how hard you work. When you accept what arises, when you stop insisting it should have been different, you stop adding your own suffering to the pain that's already present. The difficulty remains, but you can respond to it clearly, instead of being consumed by the injustice of it." This story illustrates something crucial about how we create unnecessary suffering. Things don't happen to you as punishment, and they don't happen for you as part of a cosmic plan designed for your growth. They happen from conditions, countless causes coming together in ways that produce effects, some of which impact your life. Your body develops an illness not because you deserve it or because the universe is teaching you something, but because cells mutated, or immune responses failed, or genetic factors expressed themselves, or environmental exposures accumulated over time. Your business fails not because you're a failure or because fate decided against you, but because market conditions shifted, or timing was wrong, or competitors had advantages, or customer needs evolved in directions you didn't anticipate. Your carefully laid plans fall apart not because life is working against you, but because those plans required specific conditions to remain stable. and conditions changed. Understanding this distinction between things happening from conditions versus happening to you personally transforms how you experience difficulty. It's still difficult, still painful, still requiring you to adapt, but you're not carrying the additional weight of cosmic injustice, of wondering what you did to deserve this, of feeling betrayed by reality itself. The suffering the Buddha talked about most often isn't the pain of difficult events. It's the suffering you create by demanding that reality be different than it is. When you attach yourself to a specific outcome, you're building your peace on inherently unstable ground. The future hasn't happened yet. It will emerge from conditions, most of which you cannot see or control. But your mind doesn't like uncertainty, so it creates rigid expectations. This treatment will work. This opportunity will come through. This project will succeed. These people will recognize my value. This timeline will hold. You invest emotionally in these expectations as if they're guaranteed, as if your clarity about what should happen has any power over what actually will happen. Then, when reality unfolds differently, when the treatment requires adjustment, when the opportunity goes elsewhere, when the project meets resistance, when recognition doesn't come, when timing shifts, your mind experiences this as a catastrophe rather than as simply what happened. The gap between expectation and reality becomes a source of ongoing torment. You replay everything looking for your mistake, convinced that if you'd just done something differently, reality would have obeyed your plan. But this is the Buddha's point. Reality doesn't obey your plans. It unfolds according to causes and conditions. Some of those causes you can influence. Most of them you cannot. When you cling to specific results, several things happen that make suffering worse. You begin chasing outcomes as if your fundamental worth depends on achieving them. Success becomes evidence that you're valuable. Failure becomes evidence that you're not. Your sense of yourself rises and falls with circumstances you don't control. You fear failure as if it defines you permanently, rather than simply being feedback about what didn't work this time. Each setback feels like a statement about your identity, rather than just information about conditions. You resist any change to your plan as if flexibility is weakness, as if adapting means you failed, as if the original vision was sacred and deviation from it is betrayal. You forget that life isn't meant to be forced into predetermined shapes. It's meant to be experienced, responded to, worked with, as it actually unfolds, rather than as you imagined it would. The Buddha taught a different approach. Work with the causes and conditions you can actually influence, and release attachment to specific results. You can influence your intentions, whether you're acting from care or from fear, from honesty or from manipulation, from generosity or from grasping. You can influence your effort, whether you show up consistently Whether you do the work in front of you with attention, whether you persist through difficulty or give up at the first obstacle. You can influence your speech, whether you communicate clearly, whether you ask for what you need, whether you're honest about your limitations, whether you speak in ways that create connection or distance. You can influence your actions, the concrete steps you take, the skills you develop, the help you seek, the choices you make day by day. These are the causes you can work with, but the results that arise from these causes also depend on countless other conditions, market forces, other people's choices, timing, available resources, biological factors, weather patterns, political situations, technological developments, cultural shifts. You can plant seeds carefully, tend them with attention, water them consistently, but you cannot control whether drought comes, whether unexpected frost arrives, whether insects descend, whether the soil contains what the plant needs to thrive. This doesn't mean abandoning your dreams or goals. It means releasing the desperate grip on exactly how and when they must manifest. You can work towards something without making your peace conditional on achieving it. You can prefer one outcome while remaining open to others. You can hope for specific results without collapsing when different results arrive. When you release attachment to outcomes, your relationship with both success and failure transforms completely. If you succeed, you feel grateful rather than vindicated. You recognize that conditions aligned in ways that supported your effort, rather than believing success proves your superiority or worth. If you fail, you look for what to learn rather than what it means about you. You extract useful information. This approach didn't work under these conditions. This timing wasn't right. These skills need development without making failure an identity. If plans change unexpectedly, you adapt rather than breaking. You ask what's possible now, instead of insisting on what should have been possible. You work with the reality in front of you, rather than the reality you wanted. If people leave, you release, rather than chase. You understand their leaving arose from conditions in them, from factors in their own life that have nothing to do with your value. You feel the sadness without adding the story that you should have been able to make them stay. If timing shifts in ways you didn't anticipate, you trust that you're working with conditions as they actually are, rather than demanding they conform to your schedule. Your peace stops depending on specific results and becomes rooted in something more stable, your capacity to show up, to respond skillfully, to work with what's actually present, rather than what you wish were present. This is what the Buddha meant by freedom. Not freedom from difficulty or challenge or disappointment, but freedom from the additional suffering you create by demanding reality be different than it is. The Buddha said something that sounds paradoxical until you experience it. Everything is changeable, everything appears and disappears, and there is no lasting peace until you stop fighting this truth. Peace doesn't come from controlling outcomes. It comes from working with causes you can influence and releasing attachment to results you cannot control. When you live this way, something remarkable happens. You often achieve more than when you are desperately attached to specific results. Because you're not rigid, you can adapt when conditions change, pivot when one approach doesn't work, remain creative instead of defensive. You're not paralyzed by fear of failure, because failure has become information rather than identity. You're not consumed by need for success, because success has become gratitude rather than validation. You can work with full engagement and simultaneously hold outcomes lightly. Effort without desperation, intention without grasping, care without clinging to specific results. This is the path the Buddha taught. Not withdraw from life, but full engagement with life while understanding its nature. And this understanding, this capacity to work with reality as it is rather than demanding it be different, brings us to what the Buddha wanted most for anyone listening to his teachings to understand. You've walked through 10 teachings tonight, and if you take nothing else with you, take this. Detachment is not the absence of love or care or engagement with life. It's the presence of inner steadiness that allows you to experience everything without being controlled by anything. Nothing outside you was meant to control your inner world. Most of your suffering hasn't come from difficult people or painful situations or disappointing outcomes. It's come from the attachments you built around them, the demands, the expectations, the desperate need for things to be different than they are. When attachment loosens, pain becomes manageable. It's still there when it needs to be, but it doesn't consume you. The Buddha's final words to his students were simple: work out your own liberation with diligence. He couldn't walk the path for them. No teacher can. All anyone can do is point the direction and trust you to take the steps yourself. You can love deeply without losing yourself in people. You can care without clinging to outcomes. You can feel grief without being destroyed by it. You can want things without breaking when they don't arrive. Life becomes lighter when you stop forcing what isn't meant for you, when you stop chasing people who keep running, when you learn to move with life instead of constantly fighting against it. When you finally detach, some people will say you've changed, become distant, lost your warmth. What they're actually seeing is someone who stopped abandoning themselves to keep others comfortable. You become your own refuge. The peace you've been searching for was never in getting what you wanted. It was always in releasing the grip that made you suffer. The path is here. It's been here all along, waiting. May you walk it with wisdom,